Namaste and greetings. I, Shweta, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today we are gathered here for day 10 of UPLGYF Urban Policy and Local Governance Youth Fellowship, an online national autumn and winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program organized by IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. The chair for the program is Professor Manjula Bharathy ji, professor at the Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies, and a visiting professor at IMPRI. The conveners for this course are Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar, Mr. Sameer Unhale, Mr. Arvind Unni, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Arjun Kumar. We've also shared the course outline and reading resources document in your email for your kind attention. We will be providing videos of each session for flexible learning at your place and convenient time. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. First, it is encouraged that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise and refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. Without any further delay, I would like to invite the first speaker of the day, Dr. Deepak Sanan, a former IAS officer and ex-additional chief secretary of Himachal Pradesh, a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research, a senior advisor at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and a visiting senior fellow at IMPRI on urban development policies and schemes, the implementation issues, challenges, and way forward. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir. Welcome and over to you.
Thank you, Shweta, and welcome to all the participants. My session today is going to focus on India's urban development policies and schemes. I'll start by saying there are two usually often stated facts about India's urbanizations, or in general about urbanization. First, the point is often made is that the cities are the repositories of wealth, and therefore we should look at urbanization positively and seek to profit from it by creating the necessary conditions for cities to function well. The second point, and this is specific to India, which is often made, is that India, even as it has begun to urbanize quite rapidly in the last couple of decades, it is hamstrung by huge shortfalls of expenditure to profit from the trend of urbanization. It needs to overcome this. It needs to ramp up all its efforts at financing infrastructure, and that our policies and programs are increasingly seeking to do this, but still seem to be coming up short. This is the second point which is often made. This session will present a somewhat different perspective. This session starts by agreeing that urban can be good, but our chief constraint is not finance for creation of assets, but accountable use of assets for delivery of services. This is the main point of this session. The structure of this presentation is that we will present a brief history of the urban in terms of policies and schemes in the post-independence period in India, and delineate the dominant features which have over time become hardwired into our policy, and discuss the prospects of the situation going forward. So in a sense, three areas we'll be focusing on. Can we have the next slide, please? Next slide, Shweta. So as I said, that's the structure, and we'll start with the first part, the Urban Development Policy Program since independence. Next slide, please. So we'll very briefly look at the history of urban policies and schemes in India in a set of phases. The first phase, which we are looking at as roughly 3 plan periods between the first plan and the third plan, which is till the end of the third plan, say 1951 to 1966, is a period in which there is much less thinking about urban. It's largely rural focused. Whatever little thinking is taking place on urban is relation to rehabilitation of refugees past India's partition trauma. We also have the beginnings of some thinking on regulatory issues, on how to put in place a system for spatial planning. We start with some discussions on building codes, and we have the first master plans by the end of this period for Delhi and a few other cities come about. There is also some thinking about housing for urban poor and about eradicating slums. So it's a sort of beginning period about thinking on these issues. It becomes more specific in terms of how we look at the urban by the second phase. Next slide, please. So the second phase is the next 3 plan periods. I've just divided it into, for convenience, into three plan periods, basically highlighting that the second phase is the time when centrally sponsored schemes and really in different sectors of the economy make their appearance as part of India's planning process, driven largely by the center. So you have also the setting up of HUDCO in this belt, in this phase, and then a number of centrally sponsored schemes, especially one focused on environmental improvement of urban slums. But this period shows a sort of twin kind of focus or thinking. On the one hand, you have the continuing socialist rhetoric of land, of restricting monopoly ownership of land. So this is the phase in which you have urban land ceiling come into place. But at the same time, you have this desperate attempt to eradicate slums, not by upgrading, but by banishing. So the largest evictions of the urban poor from slums, especially in the city of Delhi, takes place in this period during the emergency. The third phase, next slide, please. The third phase is even more marked in a sort of twin focus in urban thinking. It has, on the one hand, by the end of this period, a very clear understanding that cities and urban areas and in general local bodies need to be strengthened, that decentralization is key to accountable delivery of services. And therefore, you have the 73rd for rural and 74th Amendment for urban areas happening in this period. At the same time, after the liberalization of 1991, and even preceding that, there is already a thinking on a certain market orientation for involving the private sector more and more in growth and development. So you again have these twin elements trying to jostle for space in thinking about policy. Next slide, please. The fourth phase is the one in which these twin perspectives of you need to have, on the one hand, you need to do more for creating autonomous, self-governing local bodies and urban local bodies and cities on the one hand. On the other hand, what started in the previous phase with the Rakesh Mohan committee report on the gaps in infrastructure in India, which included very hugely the urban infrastructure gap, you are now going forward in this phase by saying we need to finance these gaps in a big way. So this is the phase in which you start JNNURM. JNNURM becomes the largest program being thought of and really changing the whole orientation of thinking from rural to urban by launching a program of some, in those days, 58,000 crore or something to revolutionize thinking on urban and action on urban infrastructure in India. It's combined with this whole attempt that we need to reform the way cities are run by making it a great focus on how to make cities more decentralized, more self-governing, by insisting in reform conditions that the 74th Amendment should be implemented by states in toto, and all the 18 functions should be handed over to the states, to the cities by the states. This is the thrust of the fourth phase. And then we come to the fifth phase. Next slide, please. And that I call our current phase. This current phase sees, on the one hand, in the beginning, the coming of programs like Amrut and Smart City Mission, which you would all have heard of, and a focus on trying to make funds move faster through these schemes by reducing the reform conditionalities of the earlier period scheme of JNNURM. In a sense, the program design is accepting that there is a stickiness in the state willingness to reform city-level systems and to make them more autonomous, and therefore let us carry on in alternate ways to ensure that infrastructure is delivered, services improved. And that is done through alternate structures of special purpose vehicles as envisaged under the Smart City mission, and also greater involvement being desired from the private sector. In a sense, post-COVID, the very large scheme of special assistance to states for capital expenditure, which is introduced in 2021, makes one interesting departure from this thinking which permeated Amrut. And that is, it is actually bringing back some of those reform conditions which JNNURM envisaged. So it's trying to say, okay, cities need to be financially more sustainable. They need to reform their property tax regimes. They need to increase their user charges. They need to have better spatial planning. And there is also this focus that they need to attract more money by accessing bond markets to enable capital expenditure. So in a sense, the twin focus of this phase is a continuation of the earlier phase. And after a bit of dilly-dallying by showing less attention to these things, we are coming back to this with the special scheme, which, by the way, is considerably bigger than anything which Amrut and SCM are giving in terms of allocations in this, in the current phase of our thinking on these matters. I want to now very briefly dwell on what does this entire period of 70 odd years, 75 years, what does it stand out for? What does it show us in terms of what have been the most dominant features of India's thinking on urban, on development in general, and urban as a subset of that? How have we been seeing this? how is this really the underlying features of this the entire system, insofar as they guide our behavior of our political and fiscal system. So I'm going to focus on two dominant features. Next slide, please. So the two features which dominate this previous phase of thinking in policy and schematic terms are the features in relation to accountability for better outcomes. And what do these features tell us or show us? The first feature, in a sense, is showing that central funding and very sector-specific central funding has become an integral part of the planning, which had become in the previous place an integral part of the planning process from the 1970s onwards, has continued even after the plan concept has been done away with, and we have said that there is no longer a distinction between plan and non-plan, but the concept of central funding for very sector-specific schemes not only continues, but has actually seen an expansion in recent years. So in the plan process, there was a fairly large role for block grants, which were relatively untied and gave freedom and flexibility to states to spend on areas which they considered important. The new phase especially has done away with this. There are no untied grants anymore. It is largely a case of sector-specific funding, very tied funding, which is going into, and its entire scope has expanded enormously with especially the coming of the scheme for special assistance to states for what is now capital investment. This SASCI scheme, which has allocations of 1,50,000 crore in the current year, was 1,30,000 crore the year before, has been growing exponentially since it was introduced in 2021, and increasingly has very large sector-specific focus and introduces not just sector-specific focus, but also a reform focus by laying down conditionalities on states to meet those conditions of reform in order to access these funds. The other important thing to note is that this has a huge focus on asset creation. And that's the second part which I wanted to draw your attention to. The second dominant feature I wanted to draw your attention to is something which is just taken for granted. It's never really discussed in development circles in India over the years, is the implicit understanding of development in India, which has emerged over 70 years, 75 years of planning and thereafter. And that is that development in India has come to mean a new project, a new institution, and not sustainable delivery of services themselves. So when we look at development, we don't really look at are services really improving? In our understanding, this is coterminous with a new project, a new institution, a new aims in health, a new IIT in education, a new huge infrastructure project like major expansion of highways, airports, industrial corridors, etc. It is all about creating fresh assets. This, in recent years, this has also meant that this is really only about new projects, because capital expenditure is what is being funded through a lot, the SASCI and associated schemes now, like Amrut and SCM, etc. And In the planning era, you still had some scope for revenue because new institutions and their revenue expenditure were allowed to be met through plan funds, especially during a plan period and sometimes even beyond. The fallout of these two features are twofold. One, that the central funding means that increasingly the center is seen as principal in all matters, and states have become agents. And states have become agents in this process, or in people's eyes are agents, which are there to do the center's bidding rather than doing things on their own. In effect, accountability suffers when there is a principal agency relationship between center and states. And this becomes even more pronounced at the local body level, which are even more now agents of both the center and the states. Since virtually all their funding comes from these sources, very often the functions which they are performing are very small. Most of the functions are being performed by state level organizations which are not really accountable to them. So they're just handing over money to them. So what we have is a great problem with accountability because of the whole accent in our fiscal system of sector-specific, specific purpose grants or loan funds going directly downwards. The second problem with this is that the whole the accent on development as something new means that there are no real funds for operation and maintenance. This is somehow just an ignored area. The states have to look after it. And the message it is actually conveying is that the money is available for the new, and there's no real money for operation and maintenance. And therefore, if you want to access additional funds, what is the implicit message? The implicit message has been called by very perceptive observers as BNR, build, neglect, rebuild. In other words, if you build and you maintain that asset, then you will not have access to more money in the future. You will have access to less funds. But if you neglect and let the existing asset go to seed, then you qualify to try and make new assets and therefore get more money for fresh asset construction. This BNR phase is one of the greatest problems with India's attempt at trying to become something which funds and actually delivers sustainable services in not only urban areas, but in the entire country, in not only the urban sector, but in every sector in which central funding has become so dominant. Can we go to the next slide? And I wanted to demonstrate to you. So these are some indicators of current India's performance on quality of life in some of the services which cities are supposed to provide. The important point to note in this is at one level, the fact that, of course, compared to international standards, and even the norms which we have established for ourselves, we are doing badly. And we are doing worse in areas like open spaces, sewerage, solid waste management, slum living, which are so directly related with health and productivity of our people. So that's one point to note. The other point, which is not really stated here, but which needs to be said, is that India is actually doing worse than comparable countries at similar income levels. This is what data across the global indicators shows for India. And to my mind, the greatest reason for this is the fact that our service delivery is not only, on the one hand, not accountable for better service delivery, because there is a principal agency problem here. But on the other hand, it is greatly suffers because of the BNR syndrome, which says neglect assets rather than maintain and improve them and make them deliver. These factors need to be kept in mind as we look at what is happening even beyond this. Next slide. So going forward are the new schemes of Amrut, SCM, and even more, as I said, of SASCI. By the way, I forgot to mention, or I may have mentioned, that this year, allocations for Amrut and SCI together are something in the region of 10,000 crore. And SASCI on its own is 1,50,000 crore for creation of assets. And in that, it has a fairly large urban focus, both urban land records, and in general urban, from continuing from the last phase of last year's SASCI. And in various elements of support to Amrut and SASCI, which is and SCM, which is possible through SASCI. So we could look at what happened to JNNURM since, as I mentioned to you and drew your attention, that the new schemes are minor modifications in a sense on JNNURM. I mean, they started as some kind of modifications by being a little loose on reform, and then SASCI brings in more reform focus. And therefore, looking back at JNNURM may give us some answer as to what the new schemes could do. And it is clear that all they will do is produce one-time spurts in infrastructure availability of a lesser or greater degree in various cities. But they will not solve the base issue of sustainable delivery of basic services in India's urban areas. The idea of creating self-governing cities has already failed, and the central schemes continue to pursue a build, neglect, rebuild, or rather continue to provide a build, neglect, rebuild incentive to agents in the states and in the local bodies who are charged with implementing central schemes. We go to the next slide, please. You will see that the agenda which we have just discussed is not really focusing on looking logically at the past and trying to derive lessons from the fact that we have already pumped in thousands of crores into the urban in successive plan periods and in the last 10 years. And we are not, what is it that is going wrong with that? How much of the money which has been pumped in is gone into assets which have gone into disuse? And what could be done with that to make it function optimally? We're not looking at that. We continue to look at the twin engines of center and development, central funding and the meaning of development as new asset creation. And this continues to drive and give a bigger push to fresh asset creation. And lastly, I want to point out that whatever data we have is not trying to show us the deficit that can be made up by redoing past assets, by bringing back, refurbishing, strengthening, reusing, improving assets which have already been created, but instead it is focusing on projections of what will be the gap in the future, so that the entire focus continues to be how can we make up this financing gap for more asset creation. And I want to show you some figures to bring this out in a bigger way. And you will see this. This is some projections done for 2030, and you'll see the huge gaps this is projecting in every sector: water supplies, sewerage, solid waste, private transportation, rail-based mass transport, affordable housing. Everywhere, we are pointing out that there are huge gaps which need to be made up and which have a long way to go if we don't put in more money, in a sense, is what we are saying. And the whole thrust of my argument has been that even as we need to put in more money, unless we pay attention to how this money can be spent more accountably and what can be done to bring accountability to even refurbish and improve past expenditures, it is like pouring water into a leaking bucket. And for some time, the bucket looks half full, 3/4 full, and then very quickly, the leaks mean that the bucket is empty. And that is what we've been doing with our schemes, plan after plan, decade after decade, and even after abolishing the whole planning process. Next slide, please. So what are our prospects going forward? Can we change what seems to be written on the wall is what the writing which I've just been describing to you in some detail. Can we change that? Can we go about creating a different future? I don't know. My view is that a key reform which has always been required and which worldwide statistical and anecdotal and clear evidence of what works has shown that the number of cities which do well, if they are autonomous, self-governing, far outweigh the cities which fail when they are self-governing and autonomous. And therefore, a decentralized scenario is essential to go forward. The 74th Amendment ought to be actually implemented in letter and spirit. But the likelihood of this happening, given India's political economy and the entire push of a very central, directed, patronage-based politics, means that the likelihood of this occurring is very low. Especially as we must remember that even as the center encroaches and pushes onto the state's domain, it wants the states to decentralize, but the states obviously do not wish to decentralize because this is something in their control. Cities are where wealth is, where power is, and to decentralize and give this up would be really something which would not suit them. The second order reform can be of the central funding schemes. And here, we could, instead of focusing so highly on asset creation and even in the reform side, instead of focusing on processes, if we were to actually focus on improved service delivery indicators, then there is some future, some hope that states and cities will attempt to do that in order to win rewards. But this does require a focus which is very clear on sustained, improved service delivery on proper indicators. There is some likelihood that this could happen in the sense that SASCI is already showing some preference for indicators but they continue to be somewhat process-based and not so much outcome-based. They need reform, but there is some possibility this could occur. But the third point, and this leaves me less optimistic, in fact, very pessimistic in India's situation today, is that in order to reward credibly, in order for rewards to function as something which people believe in and are willing to do more about, the data on which the rewards are handed out should be credible. They should not be data which leaves questions to be asked about whether this is achieved through actual performance or through the right networks and knowing the right people. And in this context, I want to draw your attention. Just one set of figures which I saw recently and which I thought might be of interest to you. Which are the states with the largest benefits from the SASCI, the Scheme for Special Assistance to States for Capital Investment? In the last few years, the largest benefits, the largest flows from the scheme have gone to Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. To my mind, their ability to show better governance and draw funds is somewhat limited if I look at past history compared to better governed states. And that shows that there may be something more than performance at play in the devolution of these funds. And if that be the case, then the likelihood of our actually improving our data generation for credible data to be made available is doubtful. In fact, let me assure you that as I research more and more areas of India's performance, getting contemporary data on credible performance indicators is really difficult, even from our sample survey organizations and any other sources. So my overall prognosis, and this is what I end my talk with, and I'm open to questions after this, my overall prognosis is somewhat dismal. I do not really expect that we will see any significant improvement in our cities becoming more livable in the near future. I think we are headed for more decay and more difficulty in coming years before we reach a stage when we start improving or rising like the phoenix. Thank you. I'm open to questions. Are there any questions in the chat box, Shweta?
Nothing as of now, sir.
Nothing as yet.
I want to thank you for the wonderful session, for your critical review, especially considering the prospects after 75 years of independence. It provided us invaluable insights. Thank you very much, sir. Now the floor is open for questions. Participants can raise their hands or unmute themselves. We have given the access to the mic. Yes, Meena, you can go ahead.
Thank you for the talk, sir. I just wanted to know, so in the long run, if there can be a change, a positive change in urbanization, how would you envision it?
So as I mentioned, Meenu, in my opinion, long-run change requires that the politics must change. I didn't say this, but implicitly that's what I'm saying. That somehow the politics of India has to change. We somehow have to graduate from a very patronage-based, top-down system, which therefore starts really looking at India as a federal system where accountability has to go down for basic services, has to be lower down, and at the same time reimagines the whole concept of development. It is not just creation of assets. Development is actually raising standards, is actually showing better quality on indicators. We need a politics which recognizes and which is willing to admit that at our level of per capita income as a country, we are worse than most other comparable countries. We are far worse. We are closer to sub-Saharan Africa. And that recognition has to come in our politics. Right now, I see the prospects as dim because our politics is only busy trying to say, oh, we are so great. We are examples for the world. We are headed for superpower status. If we are continuing to say that, I don't see how we can admit to the fact that we need to do something about where we are. If the first step is the admission of that, and that admission is lacking in India.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any further questions?
So either I didn't provoke them enough, or they all agree with me. Huh? Doesn't seem.
Hello,
I don't think.
this is Parvati.
Yeah, Bharathy.
I just wanted to say that I agree with what you're saying here, and it's the strong voice that you're putting forth into saying how the political system at the moment is. So I just want to say that I'm right now in Tamil Nadu and I'm studying the how the state is trying to improve is water distribution. As we know, the state has hit the 0 hour day. So I just want to ask that here they are trying to create, as you're saying, a lot of asset into water supply by creating WTPs and central systems for supply. But in terms of how a small, maybe a small way, how they are trying to bring in the public and the municipalities, say, to contributing towards maintaining these assets is by pulling in money from the communities to maintain these assets. So, and that is I feel like this kind of an attempt is going on in small ways in different states. Like in Tamil Nadu, this, in Kerala, we can see this. And if I take the case of Ahmedabad, where they're trying to bring in private participation. So, do you think this is one of the ways a slow change can be brought into in very slow motion indeed, but maybe in the future?
So Parvati, thank you very much for your intervention, because it raises a very interesting and very important point. So can change be brought about by a gradual movement, slowly, sort of slow, sort of moving forward, as I call it, on a ramp?
Yes. Okay.
So what you're describing is a movement along a ramp. So I personally believe that where institutions are involved, movement along a ramp is doomed, because it is prone to slide back. As on a ramp, it's as easy to slide. It's has some difficulty in moving forward, but moving downwards, backwards is very, very easy. Only when you can take steps, that movement down a ramp becomes impossible if you have steps. So if you step up, then moving back, inertia will not push you back. And why am I saying this, Parvati, is that when you are moving along a ramp, then what you are really doing is some incremental twiddling, and basic incentives have not changed. And when basic incentives say that money will be available for a new desalination plant, for a new big water supply scheme to combat net zero,
Yes.
state zero, then you will let your existing systems atrophy. Always there will be a tendency. So there could be a short-term thing that there are some very energetic, very involved people who are at the head of affairs who say, no, I got to keep things moving. I got to make things really work. And I will do, community involvement, sustainable change. And then that person goes away, and things just, the dominant incentives take over, and people just fall back into what the system just goes back to what it was better at doing, or what it was used to. And that is my pessimistic view on incremental, gradual change along a ramp. That where institutional change is required to change incentives that guide behavior, then trying to skirt this, trying to sidestep this and try and make a change, you will sooner or later slide back.
Okay, so you're saying the leadership is essentially very important, even at grassroots levels. And as long as they do not, say, give away the same spirit of social welfare, the development will still remain in the dominant hands.
Even more than leadership at the local level, much more, is leadership at the higher level must give the right message. So in this case, I'm saying the message has to begin from the center. carry on into the state, and then carry on downwards. The message that you are accountable, please make changes yourself. That message has to come. If that message is not coming, even if some local level person is giving that message, if the message from above is, come, I am your patron, come to me and I will give you more funds for a new water supply scheme, then that is what the system will keep pursuing.
Okay, understood, sir. Thank you so much.
Mr. Udbhav?
Yes, thank you for the lecture, sir. I'm Udbhav, and good evening. And I wanted to know your opinion about how can there be like a paradigm shift in policy making from what was 75 years ago, which earlier talked about the trickle down effect, which obviously did not work for India. And now that we are living in a much more holistic manner, the way we were living 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, where everything is interlinked, be it artificial intelligence, be it public policy formulation, whatever. So, in that regard, do you see a paradigm shift in policy change in the next maybe 5-7 years, or maybe before 2047? And what is your vision about that?
So the thrust of my presentation, Udbhav, and I hope I got this across to everybody, is that actually the last 50 years have seen a strengthening of, in India's political and fiscal system, despite some phases in which there was some difference. Overall, the thrust has been more centralization and more principal agency relationships in the fiscal system. And at the same time, an even bigger focus on seeing development as new assets, as new asset creation, rather than, as I said, sustainable delivery of basic services. And when you see this in these terms, this is the dominant theme. I see this dominant theme continuing for the moment. I don't see any change. I see a very unitary oriented central government today, and I don't see them backing down and changing in their form. And given the way which has become accepted and mentally, we are all tuned to thinking of development as new, as something which happens. See, in every sector, we don't think of, how many people think of measuring educational outcomes and saying, oh, that is really significant. There's a recent paper out which says the big difference, the Economist has just written about it, that the big difference between India and China is education. I think the big difference between India and all comparable countries, or all countries which have moved ahead of us, is, of course, education, but our entire thinking on development, an entire way of approaching these things, on how we've allowed accountability to be compromised through patronage systems of center downwards, how we have ignored the idea that people should be rewarded if they improve service delivery. And finally, and most important and critically in the last few years, in the last 10 years, increasingly, we've started saying data which shows failure, data which shows lack of success is not acceptable. We only want government data which says we are doing brilliantly. And I think that is the final nail in the coffin of trying to do better. So I don't see in the current political environment that policy can change in India. Policy can change in India only if we can somehow redo our politics. Our politics must be redone for policy and thinking to change and for India to really move forward, not as a mirage on paper, constantly showing we are doing better, but actually doing better.
Yes, thank you, sir.
So on that same note, I also have one
Sure, Shweta.
I would like to know your opinion on the smart city mission of India. I mean, it aims to transform India, technology-wise. So, and the kind of advancements that mission has brought upon. What do you, what is your opinion on it?
So I have not done a detailed analysis of where the money from smart cities has gone. But my anecdotal understanding from different cities, I don't even know if it is easily possible to do this. Is the data readily available to enable such an exercise? That itself is becoming such a problem in India. But I think if someone were to access the data and to do a proper analysis, where has the money gone? You will come up with some very interesting indicators. You will find that a lot of the money is going into projects which are like, for example, car parks, conference halls, major big, in my city where I live, for most of the year, not right now. Right now, I'm living in a much better city. I'm today talking to you guys from Cape Town in South Africa, which is certainly much better than living in any Indian city. But if I were to talk about the city which I really live in, which is Shimla, where has smart city money gone? Smart city money has gone into creating pedestrian pathways, pedestrian overbridges which are seldom used, long corridors of walkways, basically areas which it was fairly easy to spend money on quickly and show something as happening. But the basic problems of sewerage in that city, water in that city, solid waste management, open areas, parks, facilities for children to be able to play and be healthy. Nobody's looked at that. There's been some widening of roads so that traffic can move easier, except that traffic is growing far more, number of cars and density is growing far quicker than the ability to widen roads. All over India, that is the case. So my point is that you will see, if you really do an analysis of smart city, that it has done very little to improve the quality of life in Indian cities. There has been asset creation, and even that asset creation has been of a type which does not improve the quality of our life, our health and productivity. So that is my opinion on smart cities. It's just been involve a certain amount of private sector, let a certain amount of money flow as capital expenditure. Somehow the new mantra is capital expenditure will propel growth in India and solve all our problems.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Welcome. So is that all? Are we done? No more questions. Thank you, Lalit Kumawat. He's agreed with what I'm saying. I'm so grateful. What are the steps that can be taken towards a better India in context to policy making? I think we need to start with very simple baby steps, not on a ramp. And the first step is our data must improve. We must roll back this whole idea that critical data is bad data and should not be allowed. All kinds of critical data must re-emerge, make a comeback in India so that we really become aware of where we are and we start discussion and debate on that and therefore start thinking of ways to improve. That's the first step. It's really been damped down. It's really been shelved, the whole idea of better data, of critical data to show where we are in India. Everything is hidden so that, and it also means that we're developing more and more a culture of distrust in India. When data is hidden, when real data is no longer available, when credibility is at stake, distrust grows in the system. Development and improvement becomes even more difficult when you have less trust in the system. And I think trust is suffering today. So that's what I would say. Restore trust through better data if you want better policy. So I think, Shweta, I have exhausted everybody.
So I think those were the questions.
And
Okay, then maybe.
there's one more question. Thank you for the. Oh, that was just Parvati. So my email ID can be shared with everybody. There's no problem. It can be shared with. People are welcome to write to me. I am happy to share my email ID or even my WhatsApp. My WhatsApp number also I'm sharing on this. No problem. I have no problem about people writing to me. So I've shared that, Shweta.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I shared. I think it's accessible to everyone. All the Parvati asked for it.
It is. I think everybody can see it. Yeah.
Oh, great. Great. Right.
Okay, so I think that's about it. We can wrap it up. So again, once again, I would like to thank you for a very insightful session. Thank you very much, sir, and we hope to see you in further IMPRI events as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shweta, and thank you all of you for being willing listeners to this and for all your very interesting questions. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Grateful.
Thank you. Moving on, it is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Eesha Kunduri, a PhD candidate at the Department of Geography, Environment and Society, and a fellow of Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change at the University of Minnesota, to take up a session on urban features, future of work through digital platforms. Welcome, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you, Shweta. I'd like to share my screen. So I'll just check the controls and make sure everything's working. And also just clarifying, is it okay if I take around 40 minutes and then I can open it up to questions, or would you prefer I keep it shorter or something like that?
40 minutes is...
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Is everybody able to see my screen? Like, can I just get a thumbs up or something from people?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, perfect. And please feel free to stop me whenever people have questions or clarifications or something. I'd like to keep this as interactive as possible, but if folks have questions, so Shweta has already introduced me, and I'd like to reiterate, I am a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota, and I'm also a visiting research fellow at Hyderabad Urban Lab, which is the city where I'm currently based out of. And my PhD work is looking at questions of gig and platform work and questions for the future of work, for state regulation. And I'll be talking about some of those concerns in this presentation. But before I move on, I would actually like to throw a question at all of you here in the room. And maybe we'll take a couple of minutes. What comes to your mind when you hear the word gig or platform, platform work, digital labor platform? What comes to your mind? Any volunteers? I mean, these are terms we hear on a daily basis. So I just like to get a sense of your understanding so that I can structure this accordingly. So any volunteers at this at this meeting today? Any of you? You can also type it in the chat. Okay, temporary workers. Okay, great. Yeah, if it's more convenient, folks can type it in the chat. Thank you, Lalit. Any
Hello.
other? Yeah, hi, please go ahead.
So I'm just maybe it's a far-fetched example, but say Swiggy, wherein it's taking a lot of people as employees and giving them work.
Okay, Swiggy. Yeah, Swiggy is a great example. And I'll hold on to what you said about employees, because that's something that is a matter of debate and deliberation, but thanks for raising that. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Feel free to type it in the chat. Okay. Because I'm on screen share, so I can't see your hands up or something. So people will just have to speak out of turn. Insecurity of tenure. Thanks. That's a very, very important point again. Thanks, Nino. So I am actually going to, we have some great points on the table today. And that is where I'd like to begin with this presentation. So when we speak of gig and platform work, yeah, so when we speak of gig and platform work, what essentially we are talking about are two kinds of work. So the first is we are talking about work that is geographically tethered, that is location-based, or work that is geographically untethered. So someone here gave the example of Swiggy. We have a range of apps today like Zomato, Swiggy, Blinkit, Zepto that offer food and grocery delivery services. And these are all location-based apps because they deliver based on the location you are in and match you to the nearest possible person who is available to deliver these goods and services from a restaurant or a store. Then you have ride-hailing apps, Uber, Ola, Rapido, which all of you are familiar with. And you can also hail autos and in some cities bike taxis, although there is legal contestation around that in some other cities. But basically, it's rapidly changed the way we move around in our cities. And finally, we have apps like Porter that offer logistics. You need to send a courier from point A to point B across different cities. Or you have services like apps like Urban Company that allow you to book services in your home at the click of a button. And these services could be home repair, they could be pest control, electrician, plumber, and a wide range of services, including beauty services. So essentially, this is what we mean by work that is location-based or geographically tethered. And then there's the second category of geographically untethered work, which is tasks like data entry, transcription, translation, software development, web design, even writing product reviews, image recognition, a lot of which happens over the web across very scattered sites of work and workers. So this is variously known as crowd work, micro work, or cloud work. And we have platforms like Upwork and Freelancer that are driving a lot of this in the contemporary landscape. So one could sign up to be a freelancer or on Upwork and you bid for clients and that's how you get work. And this work could be very high-skilled work from designing website softwares, developing softwares, or it could be relatively semi-skilled from data entry, undertaking particular kinds of transcription, translation, and even writing product reviews. So often product reviews we read on the web could very well have been written by someone sitting in a remote village in Ghana. So that is the nature of geographically untethered work, because it's work that is not tied to a location and you could perform it sitting anywhere in the world. Or at least that's how the gig economy, the platform economy markets this. But what is there to this work? Because you are told you are a freelancer. You are told that you can work at your own pace, you are your own boss, and so on and so forth. But is that the actual reality? I'm going to be speaking from my own experience of undertaking research with gig and platform workers, but also what I understand from my conversations and associations with a trade union in Hyderabad, but also trade unions across the country, and also studies of gig and platform work, not just in India, but globally. So this is a broad, long, short summary of the range of characteristics that have been seen in gig work. So while it is presented as you can be your own boss and be your freelancer and so on, and pay attention to the terms I have on point 3 of this slide: independent contractors, partners, professionals, riders, captains. So if any of you have booked, and I'm sure most of you have booked services via Rapido, Uber, or these apps, you'll often be, you'll be seeing a message like your captain is on the way, so-and-so minutes away, or your rider is on the way and will be delivering your food, will be delivering your groceries in so many minutes. Or urban company would send you prompts like professional would arrive at this particular time, and so on and so forth. So essentially what is happening is that apps are using a range of terms, such as partners, professionals, captains, riders, independent contractors, freelancers, to actually say that there is no employment relationship between the app and the gig worker. So somebody actually spoke about employees and Swiggy, but this is actually the heart of the issue, that apps do not identify this army of workers which run their apps on a day-to-day basis as their employees. The argument is that these are independent contractors, these are freelancers, and they can log in, log out as they please. These are flexible hours of work, and so on and so forth. But is that the actual reality? And here is where we need to look at things far more critically than what is being presented to us by the platform companies. So essentially, gig work falls under the category of what is broadly termed non-standard work arrangements. These are work arrangements that are piecemeal, in which you are paid per task, per gig. It's highly insecure because there is no security of tenure, and it is precarious. It is contingent on the number of gigs you get in a particular day, orders, demands, and so on and so forth. So it is broadly something one could classify as non-standard work arrangement. And it is important to note here that even though gig work is being touted as a new age economy, there is nothing essentially new about it if we look at the histories of work and the histories of labor in our cities. What is new is the fact that it is run through an app or through a website. And unlike a traditional employer-employee relationship wherein you go to an office 9 to 5 and you report to a boss, here your boss is actually an algorithm, a backend of the app that controls everything, manages everything. So therefore, unlike a physical supervisor, you're now being supervised and managed by an algorithm. And mind you, these are opaque algorithms. So you and I, as a customer, or you and I as a worker who logs into the app to say deliver goods and services or food or to undertake driving, have no idea how this works. So what is essentially happening is that the worker will keep guessing how this is working, but there is no transparency. It's an absolutely opaque system. So how does the algorithm control you? So the algorithm, if you've noticed, you are often asked to give a rating, and workers often who come to deliver goods and services or who offer you a ride will often ask you to give them a 5-star rating. Now, why is this the case? Because a lot of their ability to stay on the app and performance is linked to ratings, which is actually in the hands of a customer. So in case of, say, apps like Urban Company, we have seen cases wherein workers have a rating of 4.7 and 4.8. Anything below that could lead to deactivation. So there are a large number of cases, and these are cases across the country that unions across the country are fighting, that workers are fighting, wherein a 4.69 could mean your ID is blocked. You cannot access the app anymore and you are deactivated. So ratings is a very important part of how the algorithm controls you. Then your assignment of gigs, the location where you're assigned, what is the fare that you will get, are all decided at the back end. And the worker has no say in this. And also critically, the kind of rewards and incentives you get. So you'll be told if you complete X number of rides in a day, you will get 100 rupees or 200 rupees as incentive. You will be rewarded with such and such. And therefore, what happens is that you are stuck in a cycle of constantly trying to meet targets, because the app will keep flashing targets at you of complete 10 orders and you're going to get so much, or complete 10 orders, complete a minimum of X number of orders. And if you don't comply with those requirements, your rating could be affected. The algorithm could assign you fewer gigs, meaning fewer earnings. And in extreme cases, such as in the case of Urban Company, but also we are seeing this with other apps like Zomato and Swiggy, your ID could be deactivated. So this is what scholars have called the gamification of work, because what it essentially means is that you are pulled into an endless system of targets that you're constantly trying to meet to actually make ends meet, make a certain living wage at the end of the day. And very often, you may just make enough to pay your fuel costs. And therefore, this is a very gray area because there is no transparency about how these algorithms are assigning work, determining fares and payment, and what happens when a customer gives you a 1-star rating or a 2-star rating. Your rating falls down as a worker, but is there a grievance redress mechanism for the gig worker? As customers, we can all go to customer support and chat bot and so on and so forth, but is this the same for workers? Not necessarily. And there isn't a worker helpline on any of these apps. And therefore, these labels are actually labels through which one is obfuscating the fact that there is a relationship in which there is control being exercised over the worker. There is a relationship in which you are expected to work extremely long hours. So gig workers report working as long as 12 to 14 hours a day, and you are essentially driving long hours, on the road for long hours, and then in all likelihood, you are not even meeting the minimum necessary to sustain yourself and are just sometimes able to meet fuel costs and so on and so forth. So there is very little saving. And in the early days of the boom, workers made a lot of money. But as more and more apps have mushroomed and more people have entered this market, what has actually happened is that all these realities of the promise has actually been laid bare. And what we are seeing is that apps are contesting that there is no employment relationship. However, trade unions and worker representatives and workers themselves are arguing that if I need to stay logged on for 12 to 14 hours to make my ends meet, and if I am being controlled by an opaque, unseen, invisible algorithm, which tells me where to go, which tells me how many orders to make, to meet in a day, which can penalize me if I don't meet a particular number of target, then there is a form of control that is in the hands of the algorithm, that is in the form of that is in the hands of the platform. And therefore, this is very much an employment relationship, because the actual control over your working day lies with the platform and not with the worker. It is not this promise of flexibility that is actually the idea on which gig work has been sold. And it is important to note here that this kind of piecemeal work is something that we have seen in the history of work since industrial revolution, and ever since industrial work has got restructured in varied ways. So if any of you are aware of how work in the garment industry works, it is workers are often paid on a piece rated basis. And the piece rates would vary depending on your skill category. So if you're a tailor, you would get a particular amount for stitching so many clothes. If you are in the packing department, you will get so much. If you are on the lower end of the hierarchy, wherein you're cutting threads out of the finished goods to give them a final finish, you will get paid very differently. So piece-rated work is nothing new. It's common in garments. It's also common in a lot of other industries, including work that is home-based. So a lot of women undertake work from their homes, and these are tasks on the absolute low end of the value chain. And these could include tasks like cutting threads out of finished garments. These could include tasks like putting particular kinds of finishing aspects to bookmarks. These could include tasks like sewing on particular sides of clothes like jeans to give them a design. And they could also mean tasks like sticking together the insole of a footwear. So a range of activities take place, and these are all piece rated. These are insecure because the risks of demand and the fluctuations of demand are actually borne by the worker and not by the company. So this is what is happening also in the case of platform work, with an important distinction being that the control is being exercised by an opaque algorithm. The work is happening through an app, even though the work may be physically be delivered in certain locations, as in the case of geographically tethered work. And this is being controlled through mechanisms of gamification, which motivate the worker to stay on the app for very long as 12 to 14 hours to make ends meet. So given all these characteristics, and also considering that we are talking of questions of urban policy, the very important question that arises is who regulates platform work? If platforms are saying that these are independent contractors and freelancers and not our workers, who is regulating this and who takes the responsibility for regulating this? As we know that algorithms exercise much of the control, but we know this through evidence. We know this by studying the histories of work and gig work. But when it comes to regulating, when it comes to questions of fair wages, when it comes to questions of social security, because these workers are outside the ambit of any form of social security, and the only mention they find currently is being included in the code on social security among the 4 labor codes that are currently not in force. And that also means that they are only entitled to certain kind of social security benefits. That is, if provisions of the code come into effect, but are not subject to any kind of employment benefits like provident fund, insurance from the employer, regulation of working hours, overtime payment. Labor laws require that if you work more than 8 hours, you must be paid double the hourly wage for overtime work. But this is being blatantly flouted even in the case of industrial employment. So who takes responsibility? Who regulates this? And why does this question arise in the first place? It is important to note here that the only state in India that has so far enacted a legislation for the welfare of gig and platform workers is the state of Rajasthan. And this was an act that was enacted in 2023. There are currently stakeholder consultations underway in several states, including the state of Telangana, where I'm currently based out of, but also in Karnataka and Jharkhand, wherein draft bills have been published, and they are going to be debated in the state assembly. But the only state so far has been the Gig Workers Bill Act in Rajasthan. Additionally, Telangana and Karnataka have announced accidental insurance benefits for gig and platform workers. And the state of Karnataka has also notified, and this was also upheld by the High Court, minimum per kilometer fare regulations for app-based taxis. So app-based taxis were required to follow a certain minimum that was in sync with also the city taxi fares. And this is being contested by the platform. So in effect, this has not been implemented. The state of Jharkhand has constituted a board to look into minimum wages for gig workers. But amidst all these developments, what is happening is that states have no idea on how many workers are registered with aggregators. Platform companies are commonly referred to as aggregators in the policy lingo. And we have no idea as to how many workers are registered. There is an absence of basic data, and platforms are citing data privacy concerns to provide any form of data on the workers to governments. While e-shram does have an option of self-reporting by the workers, databases such as that do not allow us to distinguish gig work from other unorganized workers. So it's a broad database wherein anybody who is an unorganized sector worker can self-report and register. A bit about the Rajasthan Act before I move further. And I don't have time to go into the details of the Jharkhand and the Karnataka draft bills, but I would encourage you to look this up. This is available online on the Labor Department websites of these respective states, and that will allow you to have an idea as to how the discourse is evolving in different states. Now, what is the bill? It requires for registration of all gig workers and aggregator companies or platforms. This allows for self-registration. Therefore, if you are a gig worker, you can go and register onto the portal. There is a unique ID for each gig worker that is going to be generated, and that is tied to social security benefits for the gig worker. And there is the idea that there will be a welfare board that allows for gig workers that will disperse, administer all social security benefits from insurance, maternity benefits, accidental insurance. And this board will have representation from state officials, from workers, from platform companies and civil society. An assessor of 1 to 2% per transaction is going to be levied on the aggregators. There is the question and a large criticism that the Act is absolutely silent on the question of employer and employee, and only provides for certain form of social security, and that too administered by the state. But in the absence of any other form of social security, activists like Nikhil Dey and Anuran Roy have said that this act is a modest but an important breakthrough, because it opens up the space for other states in the country to deliberate, to implement similar or more improved legislations. And these are actually the consultations happening currently. And note that the idea of a welfare board is not something new. In the past, we have welfare boards for construction workers and for Mathadi workers in the state of Maharashtra. The idea of welfare board, particularly in a place where employment is informal, unorganized, and very, very scattered, is something that draws on these past precedents. Now, I mentioned that this bill the Rajasthan Act is absolutely silent on the question of employer and employee. And it is here that it is insightful to look at a public interest litigation that has been filed in the Supreme Court of India by the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers. And for those of you interested, you could run a simple Google search of PIL, Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, and you will find some media articles talking about the recent hearing that happened on the 19th of November with regard to this litigation. Now, what is the basic premise of this litigation is, number one, it is drawing upon a landmark judgment, Olga Tellers versus Bombay Municipal Corporation. And some of you who are studying questions of housing rights might be familiar with this, which is essentially arguing that the right to work and the right to livelihood is an extension of the right to life guaranteed by the Constitution of India, and that the right to work also includes the right to work in decent and fair conditions of work. The second premise is actually questioning and challenging the classification status of gig and platform workers, arguing that they are workmen and therefore should fall under the ambit of all labor legislations, such as the Industrial Disputes Act, the Maternity Benefit Act, the Payment of Minimum Wages Act, because these are workmen. And so in a sense, it is challenging the independent contractor, freelancer status that platforms base their business model and their argument on not giving any social security to the gig workers. So what is essentially happening is that this PIL refers to a history of litigation and case law, arguing that the relationship between platform companies and platform workers is an employment relationship, because there is a very important element of control over your working day through algorithms. And I discussed algorithmic management at some length previously. Through location tracking, the app is constantly tracking where you are, and you can track as a customer where your delivery worker is. And finally, high performance requirements, failing which workers can be deactivated from the platform. So there is an argument that this is a relationship of control, a relationship through which the worker is fully integrated into the platform and must abide by the requirements of the platform. And therefore, gig and platform workers are entitled to to benefits under Indian labor laws and also under benefits under the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act. Now, this litigation is an important counterpoint to the wider argument that platforms are repeatedly making that these are not our employees and therefore we are not liable to them. These are two examples I have that actually show also how the relationship between platforms and the state is taking place. So the first is a collaboration between Startup India and Zomato that is talking about which is an open invitation for innovative ways through which startups that are working on sustainable and functional and scalable food packaging solutions could partner. And this is clearly a competition which comes with prize money and so on. So there is definitely a lot of government interest, but also partnerships. And this is a partnership between Zomato and Startup India. So there are these kind of coalitions that are emerging. Similarly, if you've ever ordered a service from Urban Company, you will see a lot of them have NSDC or Skill India printed on their platform. And this has to do with the fact that Skill India and NSDC plays a critical role in certifying these gig workers. Of course, Urban Company, this is the public, this is from their website. So Urban Company will call them service professionals. But as someone working in the tradition of labor studies and trade unionism, I will call them gig workers because of the various reasons that I have discussed. And therefore, there are these clear ways through which there is the platform companies and states are working closely together. And Niti Aayog actually states that the potential is 23.5 million jobs to be created through platforms. This is their report from 2022 called India's Booming Gig and Platform Economy. And there are some very, very celebratory estimates wherein not only is the employment potential speculated at a very, very high at a high rate, but also what is happening is that places like a government agency, a flagship agency like Niti Aayog actually argues that this is the future of work and that the gig economy is playing a very, very significant role in creating jobs for the Indian workforce. But as we have seen, there is a very, very important question of what is the quality of this job. And there is also a very, very important question as to what is the safety, what is the security net, what are the benefits that such jobs allow. And therefore, it is important for us to take these celebratory estimates and place them in a far more critical perspective with the actual ground realities and the voices of workers and worker unions. This is some concluding reflections, and I'm open to taking questions after this. And it'll be helpful to hear from you also because many of us use these apps on an everyday basis as customers, particularly ride hailing and grocery and food delivery. But many would also be using apps like Porter to send couriers and so on and so forth. So the question here is that what happens when you classify workers as independent contractors and partners, as platforms are doing. And this has implications for questions of labor rights, for social protection, but also for collective bargaining. And by that, I mean tripartite bargaining between worker unions, between platform companies, and government agencies, which could be the Labor Department in this case. And what is happening is that because platforms are making the argument that these are independent contractors and not our employees, they refuse to be on the bargaining table and refuse to recognize trade unions as representatives of workers. And therefore, the only time one sees platform companies and worker unions come together on the same table with government representatives is when stakeholder consultations are called for. So there is a very, very important question of who is the worker, who is the gig worker, and how to claim that category of the gig worker that is very, very prominent through these debates. The other point is that these are landscapes that are being enabled by the state. So and the previous slide wherein I have spoken about some of these collaborations, it is also important to know that the business model of platforms is actually aided by venture capital and policies of financialization. And venture capital is a very, very is a speculative model through which it is decided which company will get X number of money for this particular business, because that's the basis on which future investments are being made, return is being calculated, and so on. So there is a large question of venture capital that runs these platforms. This in turn is aided by government policies. And there are all kinds of state government coalitions and collaborations taking place. And for those of you who noticed, a lot of essential services like groceries, medicines, and even rides were being offered by these platform companies in partnership with state governments. So it is not as if these platforms are operating outside the ambit of any kind of recognition by the state, but there are coalitions and collaborations that is enabling platform companies to thrive. So therefore, the question is, if the state can enable these business models to function and platforms require the support of the state, then why can't the very same state, which confers constitutionally the right to life, and by extension, as we know from the Olga Teller's judgment, the right to livelihood, not uphold basic questions of dignified working conditions, fair wages. And that is the area, that is the position from which workers and worker unions are coming, that if the platforms are washing their hands off from us, then we will approach the state and demand our rights as citizens and as workers, because the state must guarantee us a basic assured dignity of life. And in all of this, it is also important to note that this is not your typical category of informal work. Even though many would argue that it's informal, it's insecure, it's precarious. Yes, there is truth to all of that, but it is not your typical category of informal work, because it is not street vending, it is not street hawking, it is not any of those kind of occupations, self-employed, wherein there is no relationship to a larger enterprise or a larger structure. So here, there is a relationship with the app. there is the algorithm that's controlling you. Much like you may be a contract worker in a university, you may be employed on contract in an industry, but your working hours are regulated by a particular factory or industry, even though your contract may be for 6 months, for 8 months. So you are in effect not an independent or a flexible worker. Likewise, the argument here is that you are very much integrated into the structure of the platform, and it is the platform, it is the app which through its opaque algorithms is controlling the worker and the worker's working day. And therefore, this is very much a relationship of employer and employee, and rights as workers need to be claimed. And this is an ongoing battle, as with any rights claiming battle. On that note, I'm going to stop, and we have about 20 minutes for questions. So please shoot ahead with your questions. You can type them in the chat, but it will also really be nice to, if you could switch on your camera and ask your question, because that makes this a little bit more interactive and less alienating. We can't be in a physical classroom, but we are on a Zoom room, and it'll be nice to actually, if you could introduce yourself and ask your questions. Yeah, thank you, Shweta. And is it okay? May I request you to moderate the questions if need be, like moderate timing and everything?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the session, ma'am, especially your perspective on digital platforms, how they're shaping the urban landscapes today and influencing the work of future. Thank you very much. It was very thought-provoking. Now moving on to the question and answers. Participants can raise their hands.
Yeah, Meenu.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the talk, ma'am.
Yeah, it'll be nice if you can switch on your camera, no pressure, but it'll be nice if you could introduce yourself and, let me, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have the faculty for that.
No problem. But please introduce yourself so that, I get to know you.
Sure. Thank you for the talk, ma'am. My name is Meenu. I am a research intern at IMPRI.
Okay.
So I just wanted to ask, hasn't the concept of gig, it was not called that way, but gig economy has always existed, and right now we can just see that platforms are reaping the benefits rather than individual contractors. So
yes,
do you think that even if we regulate platform economy, how can we regulate gig economy as a whole, because it has continued to exist? And another question that I had was, with generative AI, with the advent of generative AI, we see that more mundane and repetitive tasks are being done by humans themselves. And those are not outsourced to the machines, unfortunately. And the creative tasks like coding or even writing is being taken by AI. So how do we deal with that?
Meenu, can you clarify a little more when you say how do we regulate, because gig has always existed? What is your understanding of gig work existing? Like, I have a particular understanding coming from histories of industrial employment, but it'll be nice to know what your perspective is.
So let's say the plumber who comes to your house, he's only coming for a gig, and there is no security of tenure there. There is no fixed wages there. There is no code. There are no strict codes for labor or employment over there. And so these are all very precarious. These are all very uncertain terms for employment. So even if we regulate platform economy, which we can do because platforms largely exist in a more visible sphere, to what extent can we regulate the gig economy?
Okay. Thanks, Meenu. Are there any other questions? I can take a couple of them together. Okay, so if there are no pressing questions, sorry, Shweta, did you have a question?
No, I was saying you can maybe go ahead with this.
Okay, thanks. So Meenu, I'll answer your question in 2-3 parts. So the first is, and I forgot to mention this in my presentation, but I don't know if any of you have friends who are performers, singers, and or stand-up comedians, and they will say, I have a gig tonight at so and so place. So it's very important to remember that gig as such is not a new term. The idea of a gig comes from gigs in the music industry, wherein it is like a extra job, extra work you will undertake by the evening uh, to make some extra money. And it is not tied to any kind of contractual arrangements. It'll be renewed, or you're called for particular gigs at particular venues, and it depends on a range of things like your networks, like how you perform, and how popular you are as a performer, as a musician, as a stand-up comedian. So therefore, the idea comes from the world of musical gigs. And a part of that even exists today when we say something like, I have a gig at so-and-so restaurant tonight. But the important point to note is that the contemporary gig economy is very different from this world of musical gigs, because what is happening is that there is a generalized transition to more piecemeal, more contractual, more casual and insecure forms of employment. And a lot of gig workers today, like Swiggy workers, Zomato workers, Uber drivers, are actually dependent on gig work as a full-time livelihood choice, or as a livelihood option, and not some part-time thing they do for a few hours in the evening after their day job is over. Now, so therefore, there is that history to remember about the origin of the term gig. The other thing to remember is that you are absolutely right. Gigs have always existed. Gigs have existed when you talk of anybody who is not in some sort of stable employment. So yes, definitely the plumber, the domestic worker who comes to your house or your apartment complex, they are all gig workers. But what is the important difference between these forms of work and the contemporary gig economy? Is that one, the networks through which work was arranged in the so-called informal or unorganized economy, be it your domestic workers, plumbers, carpenters, and so on. These are networks, and these are networks based on multiple things. These could be networks based in a locality. So the security guard in your complex could often direct you to or would call the plumber, would call a domestic worker or the istriwala in your area. So one, there is an element of locality and neighborhood and relationships through which this work is taking place. And two, there is a determination of pricing that has happened through some mechanism. So there will be an absolute minimum that a domestic worker will charge, and will say that for jhadu pocha, this is what are the rates for so and so. And this happens through a network through which workers come together. Okay. Therefore, what is happening is that what is happening is that there is a way through which the prices are determined. And so what the gig economy or platforms have done is actually to disrupt the networks and mechanisms through which pricing is determined. So when a domestic worker will say that I am not going to perform this work for less than 1,000 rupees, or like this is the absolute minimum for such and such job, or the plumber will say that this is the minimum I will charge. all other plumbers in the locality will also charge that money. And the room for negotiation is only to a certain point. So there are mechanisms through which these networks of informal workers have decided what is a good price for them and for the services that they are rendering. And this is decided through a range of mechanisms and calculations. What the gig economy has done is to disrupt that. Now the pricing is decided by the algorithm. The app takes a commission, 30% cut, 20% cut. So there is no freedom for these large sets of informal workers to actually decide what is a good price, because they either perform on the basis of what the app gives them, or they don't perform. But even then, they have a limited choice, because they can't cancel more than, say, in the case of urban company, they can't cancel more than 5 jobs in a day. In a month, they have to maintain a response rate of 70%, and so on. So therefore, the social networks through which this work was being regulated has now been disrupted, and the control is entirely on the platform and the algorithm. So there is that aspect which we need to understand, that in the informal economy, even if it was not government regulated, like you have rightly pointed out, but in case of, say, domestic workers, there are states that have notified minimum wages for domestic workers. Of course, it's a different question how that is implemented, how it is not implemented, and so on and so forth. But remember, there is a socially regulated way in which these labor markets operate. That has completely been disrupted. The other thing is that, therefore, in the context of contemporary gig economy, because now the control is entirely with these platforms, and this is a structural question of how I am integrated into the app, how I must follow the guidelines, how I must respond to incentives, and how I can be deactivated if I don't follow the rules of the game. The responsibility of regulation then does lie with the app and the government, because this is the landscape that is being enabled through investments for which there are policies in place, there are mechanisms in place. So therefore, the state and the platforms are accountable, and that's a battle. That's a struggle. It's a political struggle that will continue, and one needs to see how this pans out. But also, regarding your question of generative AI, I'm not very sure if I got what you were getting at. I mean, yes, there are a lot of jobs that are now being relegated to generative AI. ChatGPT and others can actually do writing for you. Often it's about what are the prompts you are giving. But also, yes, there could be more mundane tasks that are still being outsourced to workers, and the payment is not very high. There is truth to all of that. But what I would also say, and I mean, now generative AI is also able to, make designs and so many things. But I think what I would like to point out here is we again need to see this far more critically. Now, in the context of, say, a fellowship program, and many of you are trained in research or are being trained in research, the critical question to ask is, how much can generative AI substitute for human intelligence? ChatGPT and its machine learning models can do some can pull together something. But if we have to look at the more critical questions of, say, wage regulation or regulation of working conditions that we are talking about here, or more deeper questions that involve human intelligence. Can all of that be done by generative AI? And my answer is no, because, and I will cite from the work of a former mentor, Professor Bharathy at the Center for Policy Research. This is an article that he wrote in the seminar, and this is publicly available, and it's called The Unsmart City. And I would really urge all of you to take a look at it, because what it is saying, and this is writing in the context of when the smart city discourse was at its peak, and we are talking about smart models of getting around in the city. I mean, something as basic as if you have to rely completely on a map to get from point A to point B, and not rely on human intelligence and not rely on the social relationships that actually structure a city, not have any human interaction with the locals, then it is not a smart city. It is fundamentally an unsmart city, because the day your technology fails, the day there is a glitch, and you can't proceed because there is no reliance on human networks, human intelligence. And the best example of this, we saw this in July when Microsoft systems failed and there was a global flight outage. And we saw the disruption it caused. And if we can't rely on human intelligence and the networks that sustain and drive our cities, then we really need to ask ourselves, what is the future of our cities and what is the future of our work that we are all headed towards? That's a long-winded answer, but
yeah, just to continue with the question. The first one was regarding, so let's say that isn't there a possibility for, let's say if I am a gig worker with associated to multiple I can be associated to multiple platforms at the same time. So isn't there a possibility for inter-platform negotiation? That is, let's say I can always go for the most rewarding algorithms. And there is always, I mean, yes, it is quite alienating and it is quite mechanized. However, there is still a possibility of negotiation within that framework. And secondly, also, I feel it, so there are, let's say, somebody who was trained to be a software engineer. When generative AI takes over, a lot of the coding which took up most of their time is being replaced by ChatGPT or better models that can provide outputs in a fraction of the time that it originally took. So one major problem with Indian youth is the skill gap. And when there is a skill gap, I think there would be lesser opportunities and more graduates in the future, which we have already started seeing. And I think I mean, we are presented with a very dangerous precedent where AI is going to take up a lot of the low skill jobs, which unfortunately are the ones that are most in demand.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but can I take a couple of minutes, Shweta, to just clarify?
Sure.
Yeah, I think to your first point, yes, there is the possibility of negotiation among, and the worker can always make choices. So just like you and I as a customer can check Rapido, Uber and Ola and go with whoever gives us the better deal, workers are doing that constantly. But the question here is not that the negotiation is happening via that. Now InDrive, for instance, is a different form of negotiation wherein you and I as a customer will be negotiating with the driver. But the question here is not that negotiation is not happening, but these are creative strategies that workers deploy to actually cope with the realities of a very, very disorienting and alienating landscape. So the question is not that workers are not doing that. They are deploying all strategies. But the question is, why should they have to do that in the first place? When it is their sweat and toil that is running these platforms and sustaining them. Why should a basic minimum fare not be guaranteed? Why should they not be entitled to that? Why should they have to do this constant calculation in their heads as to who is giving me a better deal? And regarding your second point, I think it is more of a comment than a question. And yeah, I do agree that there is a very, very bleak future of work that we are headed to. And there is one question in the chat which I'll quickly take, that which says that what is the alternative to ensure safety to the workers in the near future except unions? I don't think I don't think unions are the only alternative, but unions are the first step to collective bargaining. If workers don't collectivize, if they don't come together, then how will their demands be presented? And collective bargaining is a old system through which historically labor has negotiated with the management. So if we take that away, then we are headed to a very, very dangerous reality, which is already happening, wherein you are stripped of all your rights as a worker. And it is important to know that this is not just about Uber, Ola, and Swiggy and Dunzo workers. This is very much about your future and my future of work. We are all mostly working on contracts that are probably 6 monthly, 3 monthly. Some of these are semester-wise contracts. Our institutions are very good at saying that they don't owe us any benefits. And we are already seeing a mushrooming of apps for teaching, for medicine. And so therefore, if we don't think of collectivization, and if we don't identify as a class of workers, of gig workers, then we are ourselves complicit in stripping ourselves of basic rights as workers, and not just the platforms that are doing that. So in a nutshell, I don't think there is an alternative to collectivization. The only alternative then is to approach the state, but even for that then, and ask for social security, which is what workers are doing. But if you don't collectivize, then where is the strength? Where is the basis on which those claims are going to be made? So I don't think there is any alternative to collectivization, and collectivization is going to be crushed by both the state and by platforms, because that is a threat through which claims are being made. It's a means through which claims are being made, so it is a threat to them. If there are more questions, maybe people can write to me. Should I share my email? Is that preferred? Okay, I'll just share it here. Yeah, if people have more questions, they can reach out to me.
Thank you. Also, Mr. Lalit, do you have a question? I see your mic is unmuted. If maybe it's a network issue. Okay. All right.
Possible.
Yeah. Thank you very much, ma'am, for a very engaging session. It was. We hope to see you in further IMPRI events as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck to all the fellows. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay. Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye. So there's a quick announcement now for the fellows. So kindly note the new deadlines for the upcoming weeks. First thing is that you have to submit your extended proposal by December 8th by 8 p.m. in the evening. And secondly, one-to-one discussion about your research design with Manjula ma'am is on December 9th on Monday. Please note that the discussion will only be held for those who submit their extended proposals on December 8th by the said deadline, which is 8 p.m. And thirdly, December 12th, there will be no presentations on that day, because that you can utilize that time for the field work if needed for your proposed research. However, we do have one session with Mr. Sandeep Chachra, which will take place as planned on that day. And lastly, December 9th is the final date for presentations, and kindly note that it is mandatory for all the fellows as part of this fellowship. You can submit your queries on the WhatsApp group regarding your proposals. If you have any doubts or anything, Manjula ma'am will reply to them via voice notes altogether. So thank you very much. Sir, is there anything else to add, or can we go for the vote of thanks?
No, I think we can go for the vote. Thanks.
Right, so as we come to the end of day 10 of UPLGYF, Urban Policy and Local Governance Youth Fellowship, an online national autumn and winter school program, a 4-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program, I, Shweta, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day 10 session, Mr. Deepak Sanan and Ms. Eesha Kunduri, for taking out their valuable time and allowing us to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and have actively participated in today's celebration. We look forward to welcoming you all on December 12th of the certification course by distinguished expert Mr. Sandeep Chachra. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.